The silence after the crowd has gone is the loudest sound in football. It is not a peaceful quiet. It is a heavy, hollow resonance. The echoes of 70,000 voices have bled into the concrete, leaving behind a cavernous vacuum where only the ghosts of the game remain. You can hear the faint hum of stadium lights, the distant click of a janitor's cart, the sigh of wind through the upper deck. But what you hear most is the absence of the story. The narrative that, for 3 hours, was so brilliantly, violently clear. Winner, loser, hero, GOAT. In this silence, that story begins to unravel. The certainty dissolves. And in its place, a question takes root. One that this league has spent decades and millions and immeasurable effort to silence. What if the game was never what we were told? We speak often in football about the final season. For a player, it's the last chapter, the final lap, the year where every snap is a memory being made, every bruise a permanent receipt. It's a sacred, melancholy descent from the mountaintop. But there is another final season that is never celebrated, never memorialized with a jersey retirement. It is the final season of football's perceived innocence. The last year we could watch a game, a championship, a dynasty, and believe completely in the reality presented to us. That final season ended not with a whistle, but with the mechanical grind of an industrial shredder in the fall of 2007. The facts, as the league would have them recorded, are simple. On September 9, 2007, a New England Patriots video assistant was caught by New York Jets security recording the Jets' defensive signals from an unauthorized location. The evidence was confiscated. The league was alerted. An investigation was launched. Commissioner Roger Goodell acted swiftly and decisively. He levied the largest fine in NFL history on a head coach, Bill Belichick. He stripped the team of a first-round draft pick, and he ordered the confiscated tapes and notes destroyed. The matter, he declared, was closed. The integrity of the game preserved. But history is not written by the officials. It is written by the whispers in the aftermath. It is written by the chilling finality of that destruction order. Think about that for a moment. In an institution built on film study, on the sacredness of the all-22 tape, on the forensic breakdown of every millisecond of action, the commissioner of the National Football League did not archive the evidence. He did not seal it in a vault. He did not use it for a deeper investigation. He ordered it erased from the earth. The league's explanation was one of pragmatic finality, to prevent the material from being copied or exploited. But there is another word for the permanent deletion of evidence. It is called obfuscation. It is called a cover-up. So we are left, forever, in that stadium silence with the haunting central question of this entire saga. What was on those tapes that required absolute total erasure? Was it merely the specific illegal filming of defensive signals on that September afternoon? Or was it a Rosetta Stone, a key that decoded not just a single game but an entire era? The destruction of those tapes is the black hole at the center of this story. Its gravitational pull distorts everything around it. It warps legacies. It invalidates memories. It casts the long, inescapable shadow of doubt over the most brilliant football machine of the modern age. This is not a story about a sideline infraction. It is a cold case investigation into a crime against the sport's own mythology. The NFL sells us a product of clear-cut morality. The lines are white and straight. The rules are enumerated. The clock is precise. Fairness is enforced by men in striped shirts. We are meant to believe in a pure meritocracy of physical and strategic will. Spygate, and the shadow world it revealed, shattered that illusion. It proposed a terrifying alternative, that the competition was compromised, that the playing field was not level, but tilted by subterfuge, that the brilliant chess moves we applauded on Sunday were not born of pure football genius, but of a stolen playbook. I remember watching the Patriots that season, in the games after the scandal broke. They were a team of almost supernatural fury. They didn't just win, they annihilated. They played with a rage that seemed to transcend sport. It was as if they were trying to silence the whispers not with words, but with violence. They scored and scored and scored. They went 16-0, and a part of me, like millions of others, wondered, Is this the proof of their greatness? Or is this the fury of a machine that just lost its secret fuel? Is this excellence? Or is it overcompensation? The very fact that those questions could exist and persist is the true damage. The tapes were shredded, but the doubt was seeded. And doubt is a parasite that feeds on memory. The players who suited up in those games on both sides are left with a corrupted inheritance. Their sweat, their sacrifice, their executed plays, and their suffered injuries. All of it exists now in a historical fog. For the victors, is the champagne sour? For the defeated, does the old wound ache with a new, poisonous question of what if? What if our signals weren't stolen? What if that critical third down call wasn't anticipated? Their final season of unambiguous struggle was stolen from them, replaced by a permanent asterisk in the minds of anyone who remembers. This is the true chilling core of the scandal. It is not about the act itself, but about the obliteration of truth. The NFL, in its frantic haste to contain the fire, poured gasoline on it by choosing annihilation over transparency. They thought they were protecting the brand. Instead, they weaponized skepticism. They taught an entire generation of fans to look at dominance with a side-eyed glance, to hear the word genius and think cheater, to see a dynasty and wonder what was hidden in the basement. So we begin here in the quiet, not with the roar of a touchdown, but with the grinding whir of a shredder, not with a celebratory highlight, but with a void. Our journey is an excavation. We are digging through the packed earth of official statements, settled lawsuits, and forced amnesia. We are searching for the shape of what was lost. We are listening for the echo of what was deleted. This is the story of the spy scandals that redefined game planning. It is the story of how football's secret war was waged, exposed, and hastily buried. And it is the story of why, no matter how many trophies are raised, how many records are broken, the silence will always whisper back. What did they know, and when did they know it? The game was never the same after that, and neither were we. We called it Spygate, a neat, headline-ready portmanteau that made it sound like a singular event. A scandal, a bad act by one team that was duly punished and relegated to the past. But to view it that way is to misunderstand entirely the nature of the world we are about to enter. Spygate was not an isolated incident. It was a symptom. It was the moment the curtain was ripped back, however briefly, on a shadow league that operates in tandem with the one we see on Sunday. This is a story about the systemic culture of espionage in the National Football League. It is a story about how the relentless, obsessive pursuit of a competitive edge, a pursuit the league itself glorifies, naturally, inevitably, mutates into something darker. My thesis is this: football espionage is not an aberration. It is an evolution. It is the logical endpoint of a sport built on secrets, deception, and total informational dominance. From the moment the first coach drew up a play in the dirt and hid it from the opposing sideline, the seed was planted. The game is fundamentally about knowing what your opponent will do before they do it. It is about pattern recognition, tendency breaking, and strategic theft. What we celebrate as great film study is, in its purest form, sanctioned espionage. The difference between that and what we condemn as cheating is often just a matter of tools, methods, and the ever-shifting line the league draws in the sand. This documentary will trace how that line has been crossed, erased, and redrawn for decades. To understand the present, we must first glance backward. The history of football intelligence is as old as the sport itself. In the early days, it was crude but effective. Eavesdropping at train stations where teams arrived, bribing hotel staff for playbooks, using binoculars to steal signals from the press box. It was seen as gamesmanship, a mischievous, albeit accepted, part of the rugged fabric of the game. Coaches like Paul Brown and Vince Lombardi were notorious for their paranoia and their relentless seeking of any advantage. The difference was one of scale and technology. As the game's financial stakes skyrocketed into the billions and the tactical complexity multiplied, so too did the potential value of stolen information. The binoculars gave way to the video camera. The stolen paper playbook gave way to the hacked digital tablet. The motivation, however, remained timeless. Win. This is the dark side of game planning. It is a shadow war where information is the ultimate currency, and the currency is traded in a black market of whispers, hidden cameras, and compromised communications. On one side of this war are the perpetrators. Not cartoonish villains, but highly disciplined, pressure-fueled organizations convinced that their methods, however extreme, are justified by the sacred mandate to win. They operate in a gray zone where the definition of innovation stretches to include activities they know full well are illegal. They are often enabled by a culture of plausible deniability, where lower-level staffers become the fallbacks for ambition's excesses. On the other side are the victims, but they are rarely pure innocents. They are rival organizations, themselves engaged in the same relentless pursuit of edges, who find themselves outflanked in the shadow war. Their outrage is genuine, but it is also strategic. Their anger is about violation, but it is also about being beaten at a game they themselves are playing. Then there are the players, the men on the field whose physical sacrifices and executed assignments become pawns in this larger informational chess match. Their legacy, their pain, their triumphs are the collateral damage in a war they often know nothing about. Overseeing this entire ecosystem is the league itself, the NFL. It is the flawed regulator, the inconsistent prosecutor, and the deeply conflicted arbiter. Its primary mission is to protect the integrity of the product. But its overwhelming motivation is to protect the popularity and profitability of the shield. These two imperatives are often at direct odds. A thorough, transparent investigation into systemic cheating could expose a rot that shatters fan faith. A swift, opaque punishment, followed by the destruction of evidence, contains the scandal but erodes trust in the institution. The league's actions in moments of crisis, from Spygate to Deflategate and beyond, reveal an entity perpetually choosing between a short-term narrative fix and the long-term health of its competitive soul. It is a choice they almost always get wrong. And finally, there is us, the culture that consumes it all. The win-at-all-costs ethos is not manufactured in a vacuum. It is reflected back to the teams from the fans, the media, and the economic structure of the sport itself. We glorify the mysterious genius coach. We Leoneize dynasties. We demand victory and provide absolution for the methods, so long as the trophies keep coming. We are complicit in creating the pressure cooker where ethical corners are not just cut, but systematically excavated. When the scandal breaks, our reaction is often tribal. Outrage if it hurts our rivals, deflection if it implicates our heroes. We are participants in this cycle, not merely observers. Over the next 15 chapters, we will map the anatomy of this shadow war. Our journey begins at the genesis of modern football espionage, tracing the technological and philosophical arms race that made Spygate possible. We will dissect the mechanics of the theft itself, how it was done, who did it, and how the information was weaponized. We will live through the explosive confrontation and the league's frantic, flawed containment effort from the perspectives of those who blew the whistle and those who faced the fire. We will then follow the ripple effects. We will examine how Spygate poisoned the well of trust for a generation, setting the stage for the seismic eruption of Deflategate years later, where the prior sin made all subsequent accusations plausible. We will venture into the digital frontier, where cyber-espionage represents the next, more terrifying battlefield. We will hear from the foot soldiers of this war, the video assistants, the quality control coaches, who faced ethical crossroads with their careers in the balance. We will sit with the defeated coaches and players who live with the haunting, unanswerable question of what might have been. We will pull back the curtain on the media's role, from initial complicity to frenzied exploitation. We will grapple with the fans' dilemma, how to love a tainted glory, and we will finally step into the philosophical abyss to ask the hardest questions. Where is the line between gamesmanship and fraud? Is any edge morally justifiable in the pursuit of victory? And in a system with such immense pressure and such vague boundaries, is cheating not simply an inevitability? This is not a search for a single villain. It is an autopsy of a system. The spy scandals did more than redefine game planning. They redefined our understanding of the sport itself. They exposed the contradiction at the heart of modern football, a league that markets itself on tradition, integrity, and clear-cut competition, while its reality is shaped by secrecy, ambiguity, and a shadow economy of information. The legacy of these scandals is not measured in lost draft picks or levied fines. It is measured in the persistent, corrosive doubt that now hangs over every achievement, every dynasty, every moment of brilliance. It is measured in the loss of faith. We begin our investigation not with the assumption of guilt, but with a pursuit of context. We are seeking to understand the how and, more importantly, the why. We are looking for the reasons why intelligent, accomplished people decide the rules are for others. We are tracing the path from a coach's desperate desire to win a game to the institutional decision to destroy the evidence of how far he was willing to go. This is the story of football's secret history. It is a history written in stolen signals, deleted tapes, and whispered accusations. It is time to listen. To understand the fever dream of modern espionage, you must first understand the seed from which it grew. The desire to know what your opponent is thinking is not a modern corruption of football. It is the very essence of its strategic heart. Long before there were radio transmitters in helmets or tablets on sidelines, there was the signal, a waved arm, tapped helmet, a shouted color and number. It was a primitive code broadcast in the open, and its vulnerability was the sport's original sin. The entire history of football intelligence, and by extension football espionage, is a story of action and reaction. It is an arms race that began the moment the first coach realized he could gain an advantage by deciphering his opponent's gestures before the ball was snapped. In the sport's rough, early decades, information gathering was a hands-on, almost pastoral endeavor. It was less about technology and more about guile, about human networks and old-fashioned hustle. Coaches would send scouts, not with video cameras, but with keen eyes and good memories, to sit in the stands and chart plays by hand. They would rely on friendships with sports writers or connections at small colleges to get glimpses of an opponent's new formations. The playbook itself was a sacred, physical object, and its theft was the ultimate prize. Legends abound from this era. Teams changing their signals at the last minute after suspecting a rival had bribed a hotel telegraph operator. The infamous tales of coaches like Pop Warner or George Halas, who were celebrated for their cunning as much as their strategy. Halas, founder of the Bears, was known for his relentless reconnaissance, once reportedly disguising himself to watch an opponent practice. This was not yet seen as cheating. It was shrewdness. It was gamesmanship, a term that has always served as a moral buffer between cleverness and criminality. The central, enduring vulnerability was, and in many ways still is, the sideline-to-player communication system. For most of the sport's history, this was a human chain. Plays were relayed from head coach to assistant, from assistant to player substitute, who would then run onto the field and deliver the call in the huddle. This was slow, cumbersome, and ripe for interception. The evolution towards the direct signal from coach to quarterback on the field was a necessity born of speed and complexity. But it created a public spectacle of coded information. Defensive coaches would station assistants high in the press box with binoculars, not just to see formations, but to steal those signals. Everyone was doing it. The question was never whether you were trying to decipher the opponent's code. The question was how good you were at it. This is the critical, foundational truth we must confront. Signal stealing, in its pure observational form, was considered legal and ethical for decades. It was part of the chess match. If your opponent was foolish enough to broadcast his intentions with a predictable gesture, you were a fool not to take advantage. The intellectual framework for modern spying was built right here, on this ambiguous plane. Where was the line? If you used binoculars from an approved press box location, it was gamesmanship. If you sent a staffer to an unauthorized location with a camera, it became cheating. The act of obtaining the information was identical. The methodology of decoding it was identical. Only the tool and the location differed. This fragile distinction would become the fault line upon which the entire Spygate scandal would tremble. The culture of the sport embraced this shadowy contest. Players and coaches spoke of it in winking, knowing terms. It was part of the lore. The 1958 NFL championship, the so-called greatest game ever played between the Baltimore Colts and New York Giants, is shrouded in such myths. Stories persist that cult players, through a combination of stolen signals and sharp observation, knew exactly what the Giants' defense was going to run on the game's critical final drive. Were these stories true? It hardly mattered. They were believed. They fed the narrative that football was not just a physical contest, but a battle of wits, of preparation, of intellectual theft. The smartest team won, and smart could encompass a wide range of activities. The technological revolution of the late 20th century did not create this desire for clandestine information. It simply amplified it, industrialized it, and raised the stakes to unimaginable heights. The introduction of widespread game film study turned a tactical advantage into a scientific pursuit. The development of the headsets in helmets coach-to-quarterback system in the 1990s was meant to solve the signal-stealing dilemma. It created a private channel, but it also created a new paranoia. Could the signals be intercepted? Could the opposing team listen in? The league went to great lengths to encrypt and secure these communications, officially ending one era of espionage. But it was a naive hope. The genie of informational advantage was out of the bottle. If you could no longer easily steal the live call, you would find another way. You would steal the opponent's entire catalog of calls ahead of time. This shift is where the cultural concept of gamesmanship began its strained, painful divorce from the legal definition of cheating. Gamesmanship lived in the gray area of observation and deduction. Cheating entered when you employed a prohibited technology to gain a systematic, rather than situational, advantage. When you moved from trying to decode signals in real time with your eyes and a notepad, to recording them with a camera so you could build a comprehensive library for future use, you changed the fundamental nature of the contest. You were no longer playing the game in front of you. You were data mining past games to rig future ones. You were moving from a participant in the chess match to a hacker of the chessboard. The pressure to cross this line grew exponentially with the sport's commercialization. The financial rewards for winning became astronomical. Coaching careers, measured in brutally short timelines, lived and died by weekly results. The margin between genius and failure was paper thin. In such an environment, the temptation to weaponize information, to turn preparation into predation, became overwhelming for some. The old guard's acceptance of sideline espionage had established a precedent that whispered, "Every advantage is moral if it leads to victory." The stage was now set. The philosophical justification was baked into the sport's history. All that was needed was an architect, a person or an organization willing to systematize the shadowcraft, to take the folk practices of football espionage and build a modern, efficient intelligence agency under the umbrella of a football team. The arms race was about to turn into a shadow war. Every system, no matter how shadowy its purpose, requires an architecture. It needs a blueprint, a culture, and a relentless will to execute. The rise of the New England Patriots dynasty in the early 2000s was not merely a story of football excellence. It was the clinical construction of a machine designed to eliminate variables, to exert control over chaos, and to find advantage in spaces others deemed insignificant. To understand how espionage became operational within this machine, you must first understand the machine itself. Its fuel was not talent alone, but a pervasive, grinding obsession with detail. Its product was not just victories, but a suffocating certainty that left opponents feeling outthought before they were outplayed. This environment, where every scrap of information was sacred, became the perfect petri dish for clandestine methods to grow. The philosophy was simple, seductive, and ultimately corrosive. No edge is too small. The architect of this system, Bill Belichick, arrived not as a charismatic guru, but as a forensic analyst of the game. His legacy prior to New England was that of a defensive savant, a man who understood football less as a sport of emotion and more as a complex puzzle of leverage and information. His father, Steve, was a scout and a lifelong student of naval warfare, imparting lessons on reconnaissance, strategy, and the critical importance of knowing your enemy's capabilities and intentions. This was not a metaphor for Belichick. It was his operational manual. He built a culture that revered preparation above all else. Practices were silent, focused, and brutally efficient. Sentimentality was a weakness. Past achievements were irrelevant. The focus was always on the next piece of information, the next tendency to break, the next vulnerability to exploit. In this world, a single play from 3 seasons ago could be the key to winning a game today. The normal boundaries of football study were not just pushed, they were erased. This created a systemic pressure that was both the machine's great strength and its fatal flaw, the pressure to innovate beyond the possible. When you tell an organization that every molecule of the game matters, that every blink of an opponent's eye could contain data, you create an insatiable hunger. Staffers, coaches, and assistants lived in constant fear of missing something. Their value was tied directly to their ability to uncover a nugget of intelligence no one else had found. The legal, exhaustive methods of film study, breaking down every broadcast angle, every all-22 film, were just the baseline. The culture demanded more. It whispered a constant question. What are we not seeing? What does the opponent have that is hidden? This intellectual fervor, this relentless pursuit of the unknowable, naturally began to gaze toward the gray zones, and then beyond them. When your entire identity is built on being the most prepared entity in the sport, the distinction between preparation and illicit intelligence gathering starts to blur. The ends, total football enlightenment, began to justify means that existed in a moral twilight. The system functioned on a principle of compartmentalization and plausible deniability. Lower-level football staffers, video assistants, and quality control coaches were the foot soldiers. Their career trajectories depended on being useful, on being problem solvers, on making themselves indispensable to the machine. They were not evil masterminds. They were ambitious young men operating in a high-stakes environment where the directive from the top was clear. Find an edge. The specific methods might not be dictated from the head coach's office, but the culture absolutely was. It was a culture that celebrated results, not inquiries about process. If a staffer found a novel, unorthodox way to capture an opponent's signals, and that information helped win a game, he was a hero. The ethical onus was diffused across the system. The pressure to provide value was immense, and the rewards for doing so were tangible. In such an ecosystem, the step from dutifully filming your own team's practices to filming an opponent's sideline from a prohibited location was not a leap of conscience, but a gradual slope of incremental transgressions. This is the critical analysis of the systemic pressure. It was not necessarily about malicious intent from the top down. It was about creating an environment where the rules were seen not as boundaries, but as obstacles to be navigated. The NFL's rulebook is a vast, intricate document. The league's memo on the use of video equipment for any purpose was clear, but in a culture that parsed opponent tendencies on a molecular level, such a memo could be rationalized. Perhaps it was seen as an archaic rule in a digital age. Perhaps it was viewed as the league protecting lazy teams from smarter ones. This is the arrogance that accompanies a culture of total information dominance. You begin to believe your pursuit is purer, more necessary, than the rules designed to constrain it. Innovation becomes its own morality. The machine's early success validated its methods. The 3 Super Bowl victories in 4 years were not just wins. They were proof of concept. The system worked. The obsessive detail, the relentless pressure, the leaves no stone unturned philosophy. It all produced the ultimate results. And with each championship, the culture hardened. The mythology of the Patriot way grew, a term that came to symbolize not just hard work and sacrifice, but a cold, ruthless efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. Opponents and media alike scrambled to decipher the secret. They spoke of genius, of mystique, of an otherworldly level of preparation. What they rarely considered, what the system itself actively camouflaged, was whether that preparation had ever crossed into territory the league itself had outlawed. The success acted as a shield, a dazzle camouflage that made it difficult to look too closely at the methods. To question the machine was to be dismissed as a sore loser, a rival making excuses for being outclassed. The architecture was now not only built but fortified by its own triumphant output. The stage was set for the shadow operation to move from a theoretical possibility within a pressure cooker culture to a tangible, practiced reality. The machine was hungry, and it was about to be fed. The architecture provided the will. The culture provided the pressure. But espionage, in the end, is a craft of mechanics. It is about the granular, physical execution of theft. To move from a philosophy of total information dominance to its actual achievement required a toolkit, a methodology, and a coldly efficient process. This was not the romanticized spycraft of cinema. It was a blue-collar operation of cables, cameras, and spreadsheets. It was the translation of a competitive desire into a series of actionable, clandestine tasks. The journey from the old world of binoculars and notepads to the modern era of digital libraries did not happen overnight. It was an evolution, a scaling up, and at its peak, it functioned with the dull precision of a corporate accounting office, if that office were dedicated to stealing football secrets. The foundational method, the one that would become the center of the scandal, was the unauthorized videotaping of opposing coaches' signals. But to call it simply videotaping is to undersell its systematization. This was a coordinated intelligence gathering operation. It began with personnel. The operative was typically a low-level video assistant, someone whose presence on the sideline or in the stands would not attract attention. Their equipment was often a handheld video camera, commonplace enough to be unremarkable. The innovation, the crossing of the line, was in the positioning and the intent. League rules explicitly stated that no video recording devices were permitted for use by a club for any purpose in the coach's booth, on the field, or in the locker room during a game. The operatives were sent to locations that violated these rules. The sideline itself, or seats in the stadium explicitly purchased to provide a sight line to the opposing team's defensive or special teams coaches. The task was not to film the game. It was to film a single, specific person on the opposing sideline for 60 minutes. The camera would zoom in, holding steady on the defensive coordinator's hands, his mouth, his body language. Every gesture, every shout, every turn of the head was captured. Simultaneously, the operative would often have a second feed, sometimes audio, sometimes a separate camera angle, focused on the field of play. The goal was synchronization, to create a paired record. This specific gesture, at this exact moment, resulted in this specific defensive play. The raw footage was the first harvest. It was data in its crudest form. The real work began when the tapes were transported back to the machine's headquarters. Here, the process moved from collection to analysis. The video was turned over to other staffers, often junior coaches or football operations personnel. Their job was to decode the cipher. They would sit in dark rooms, scrolling through the footage, creating a master ledger. They would catalog every signal. A hand on the hip meant a blitz from the strong side. A crossed arm meant a zone coverage. A hat taken off and put back on meant a substitution package. They would match these signals to the film of the actual defensive play that followed, building a comprehensive dictionary of the opponent's play-calling language. This dictionary was not a static document. It was updated weekly, sometimes daily, as opponents changed their signals or added new wrinkles. The output was a series of cheat sheets, charts, and diagrams that could be distributed to coaches and, crucially, to players. The implementation on game day was the final, sinister payoff. A linebacker, returning to the sideline after a series, might be shown a photograph or a quick clip on a tablet. See this? When the coach does this, it's this play. You see it, you know it's coming. The quarterback, studying the sideline before the snap, might recognize a sequence of gestures and immediately know where the defensive pressure was originating. The stolen intelligence effectively short-circuited the opponent's strategic language. It turned a complex, coded command into a plain text announcement. The psychological advantage was immeasurable. An offensive player who knows the defense is not guessing, not reacting. He is executing with certainty. It creates a sensation of clairvoyance, of inevitability, that can demoralize an opponent more thoroughly than any physical hit. But the mechanics were not limited to live game theft. The system had other vectors. There was the persistent, though never conclusively proven, lore of the walk-through espionage. The suspicion that opponents' private, closed-door Saturday walk-through practices on a game weekend were being observed or recorded. There were concerns about the security of team facilities when traveling, the fear that playbooks or strategy sheets left in meeting rooms could be compromised. The digital age introduced even more fertile ground. As teams moved to digital playbooks on tablets, the threat of hacking, of electronic surveillance, became a new frontier of paranoia. Could an opposing team intercept wireless signals? Could they gain access to a team's internal server to download game plans? The mechanics of theft were evolving in real time, from analog to digital, from stealing gestures to stealing data packets. The 2007 case that ignited the Spygate scandal was a perfect, almost textbook example of the analog method in action. The Patriots video assistant was caught not just filming, but filming from the New York Jets sideline itself. He was, according to reports, wearing Jets apparel to blend in. The camera was confiscated. When Jets security and later NFL officials reviewed the tape, they found exactly what the mechanics dictated. A continuous, uninterrupted shot of the Jets' defensive coaches, with the field action in the background. It was a raw intelligence feed captured in the act. It was not a smoking gun. It was the entire factory caught on its delivery run. This was the system operationalized, and in its sheer brazen normalcy, it was chilling. It was not a frantic, desperate act. It was standard procedure, and that was the most damning revelation of all. The mechanics were so ingrained, so routine, that executing them on an opponent's sideline, in their clothing, seemed like just another part of the job. The mundane nature of the theft was what made it so profoundly alarming. It had become corporate policy. Every system of espionage, no matter how sophisticated, contains within it the seed of its own exposure. It requires human beings to execute it, and human beings are vulnerable to error, to arrogance, and to the simple, unexpected intervention of another person looking in the right place at the wrong time. For the surveillance machine we have been detailing, its exposure did not come from a league audit or a moral awakening within its own walls. It came from a rival. Not just any rival, but a rival built in its own image. A rival who knew the playbook because he had helped write it. The story of Spygate's public explosion is, fundamentally, a story of betrayal. But whose betrayal was it? The betrayal of the game's rules, or the betrayal of a sealed fraternity's omerta? The answer depends entirely on where you were standing on that September afternoon in 2007, and whether you were holding a camera or watching someone who was. The New York Jets, under first-year head coach Eric Mangini, arrived in Foxborough for the 2007 season opener as definitive underdogs. Mangini was not just any opposing coach. He was a Belichick protege. He had served on the Patriots staff for years, had been in those meeting rooms, had absorbed that culture. He understood the obsessive pursuit of detail. And, crucially, he understood the methods that pursuit might encompass.
We need to talk about the
Suspicion of the Patriots' signal-stealing operations was not new in the NFL. It was a persistent, grumbling rumor. But for Mangini and his staff, it was not rumor. It was a specific, tactical concern. They had prepared for it. Before the game, Jets security personnel, acting on directives from the football operations side, were specifically instructed to be vigilant for unauthorized filming. They were told what to look for. This was not a random discovery. It was a counterintelligence sting. The operative, a Patriots video assistant, was stationed on the Jets sideline. He was wearing Jets apparel, a clumsy attempt at camouflage. To the trained eye of a security detail looking for exactly this, he stood out. He was reportedly filming continuously, his lens focused not on the field, but down the sideline toward the Jets' defensive coaches. Jets security approached him, confiscated the camera, and escorted him from the area. The footage on that tape was undeniable. It was a pristine, uninterrupted record of the Jets' defensive signals. It was evidence not of a spontaneous idea, but of a planned assignment. The immediate reaction within the Jets organization was a mix of validation and cold fury. Their suspicions were confirmed. The playing field, they believed, had been actively sabotaged. Now came the critical decision. What does a team do with this evidence? The NFL is a league built on fierce, tribal competition, but it is also a closed ecosystem with a powerful central authority. The unwritten code, the cultural omerta, suggested handling this internally. A quiet word, a behind-the-scenes threat, perhaps a private complaint to the league that would never see the light of day. Going public, or even filing a formal report, was an act of war. It would label the Jets and Mangini specifically as snitches. In a league that prizes toughness and self-reliance, being a whistleblower is often seen as a sign of weakness, an admission that you couldn't beat your opponent straight up. Mangini and Jets general manager Mike Tannenbaum faced a profound ethical and professional dilemma. They could follow the cultural code and bury it, or they could follow the rulebook and ignite a scandal. They chose the rulebook. Their reasoning, as explained later, was multifaceted. First, there was the competitive outrage, a feeling that their work, their players' preparation, had been violated. Second, and perhaps more compelling, was a stated belief that they had a duty to the league. If they didn't act, the practice would continue. The integrity of the competition itself was at stake. This was not merely gamesmanship. It was a direct violation of a clear league rule. To ignore it was to be complicit in its continuation. Mangini, the disciple, was now the apostate. He made the call to the league office. The machine had been built to be impervious to external scrutiny, but it had not accounted for an insider who knew all its pressure points and chose to push them. The aftermath of that decision created a schism that would never heal. In the macho, insular world of the NFL, what Mangini did was considered by many a cardinal sin. He had broken the seal. He had taken a dark, open secret and made it a public affair. The rivalry between the Patriots and Jets was always intense, but now it was poisoned with a personal, bitter venom. Belichick's relationship with Mangini, once that of mentor and protege, was utterly destroyed, frozen in a permanent, public ice. The Jets were accused of sour grapes, of trying to gain a competitive advantage through the back door of the commissioner's office. They had won the moral battle, but in the court of NFL public opinion, they risked being forever branded as tattletales. This tension is the heart of the whistleblower's dilemma in professional sports. The league's integrity relies on people reporting violations, but the culture of the league punishes those who do. The Jets, by acting, exposed not just the Patriots, but this glaring hypocrisy. They forced the league to confront an act it likely would have preferred to ignore. They transformed a private understanding into a public crisis. In doing so, they took upon themselves a burden. Whether they were hailed as guardians of fairness or scorned as weak-willed informants, their 2007 season, and indeed Mangini's coaching legacy, would forever be intertwined with that one act of confrontation. They had stopped the operation in its tracks, but in the process, they had thrown a lit match into a room everyone knew was filled with gas. Now, it was up to the league to decide whether to put out the fire or to try and contain the explosion. When the call from the New York Jets reached the NFL offices, the league was presented with a crisis that struck at the very core of its product's credibility. This was not a player arrest or a salary cap violation. This was an allegation that the competitive integrity of the game itself had been compromised by one of its most successful franchises. The league's response would not be a simple adjudication of rules. It would be a masterclass in crisis management, a frantic effort to balance the demands of justice with the overwhelming imperative to protect the brand. The investigation into Spygate, as conducted by Commissioner Roger Goodell, was less a search for truth and more a controlled demolition. Its goal was not to expose the full scope of the problem, but to contain its blast radius, to bury the rubble, and to declare the site safe for future business as quickly as possible. Roger Goodell, still early in his tenure as commissioner, had built his reputation on a platform of personal conduct and integrity. He was the disciplinarian, the man who would clean up the league's image. Spygate presented his first true test of institutional, rather than individual corruption. He moved with stunning speed. Within days, he had levied unprecedented penalties. A $500,000 fine against Bill Belichick, the largest ever for a coach, a $250,000 fine against the Patriots organization, and the forfeiture of their 2008 first-round draft pick. The message was clear and forceful. The league was angry. The punishment was severe. The matter, he insisted, would be closed. But the speed itself was suspect. A truly thorough investigation into a systemic, years-long espionage operation could not possibly have been completed in a matter of days. The swiftness of the judgment suggested a desire for narrative control, not judicial diligence. Then came the decision that would forever haunt the league's handling of the scandal and fuel every conspiracy theory that followed. Commissioner Goodell ordered the destruction of all the materials confiscated from the Patriots. The tapes, the notes, the hard drives. Everything was to be physically destroyed under league supervision. The official explanation was pragmatic. Goodell stated he did not want the materials to circulate or be used improperly. He claimed he had seen all he needed to see to justify the punishment. But to the outside world, to fans, to journalists, and to other teams, this act was not pragmatic. It was catastrophic to the historical record. It was the purposeful erasure of evidence. In any other context, the destruction of evidence after an investigation raises immediate, glaring questions about what that evidence contained. The NFL was not exempt from this logic. By ordering the shredding, Goodell did not put out the fire of suspicion. He poured gasoline on it. He transformed the scandal from a story about stolen signals into a story about a cover-up. The league's primary motive was transparently one of containment. A full, transparent investigation risked uncovering a scandal of unknowable breadth. How many games were affected? How many opponents were victimized? Did this practice extend beyond the Patriots? Were other teams engaged in similar operations? These were questions the league had no appetite to answer. Each affirmative answer would have meant another black eye for the sport, another set of asterisks, another wave of disillusioned fans. The financial and reputational calculus was clear. It was better to sacrifice one team and one coach as bad actors, punish them severely in the public eye, and burn the evidence that could lead to wider culpability. The integrity of the individual season was sacrificed to protect the perceived integrity of the league's entire history. It was a brutal corporate decision disguised as judicious action. The league's control of the narrative extended to its communications with the public and the media. The message was tightly scripted. This was an isolated incident. The Patriots had misinterpreted a rule. The punishment was decisive and final. The tapes were destroyed to prevent their misuse. Any reporter or outsider who pushed for more details was subtly framed as someone trying to harm the game. The league used its immense power to shepherd the story toward a conclusion of its own choosing. They offered limited, controlled access to investigators' findings, always emphasizing the finality of the process. They encouraged the football world to move on. This was not an invitation to understand. It was a directive to forget. But the destruction of the evidence created a vacuum, and nature abhors a vacuum. Into that void rushed speculation, accusation, and myth. Former players and coaches from defeated rivals began to speak openly about their long-held suspicions. The most damaging rumor, one that the destroyed tapes could have confirmed or denied, was that the Patriots' spying operation extended beyond stealing defensive signals in the present game. The rumor suggested they had taped opponents' walk-through practices, the sacred, private final rehearsals held the day before a game. This allegation, if proven, would have represented a quantum leap in espionage, from stealing a live language to stealing the entire game plan from the drawing board. The league, having destroyed the evidence, could never conclusively disprove it. Their containment strategy had birthed a monster of limitless suspicion. The message the league sent was received loud and clear by every owner, general manager, and coach in the NFL. The message was not, do not cheat. The message was, do not get caught. And if you do get caught, understand that the league's priority will be to manage the scandal, not to excavate it. The punishment, while severe on paper, was a transactional cost of doing business. A draft pick and $750,000 were a small price to pay for the perceived advantages gained over years of dominance. The legacy of the investigation is one of profound failure. It failed to provide closure. It failed to restore trust. It failed to answer the basic questions of who, what, when, and how much. Instead, it established a dangerous precedent. It taught the league that the most effective way to handle an existential crisis was not transparency and accountability, but opacity and controlled sacrifice. It was a lesson that would shape the league's response to every scandal that followed, creating a template for crisis management that valued the shield's shine over the game's soul. The case was closed, but the door to doubt had been blasted off its hinges. The official sanctions landed with a thud meant to echo through the league. A record-setting fine against a head coach. A massive penalty against the franchise. The forfeiture of a first-round draft pick. The lifeblood of team building. On paper, Commissioner Goodell had thrown the book at the New England Patriots. The message was designed to be one of finality and forceful justice. The crime had been committed. The sentence had been delivered. The ledger was settled. But in the court of public opinion and historical legacy, the gavel never really fell. Instead of closure, the punishment became merely the opening argument in a never-ending trial. The fallout from Spygate was not contained to a loss of money or a draft selection. It was the unleashing of a corrosive agent into the bloodstream of the sport, a compound of official penalty, wild rumor, and permanent, unanswerable doubt. The tangible penalties were severe, but they were also transactional. For a franchise of the Patriots' wealth, the $750,000 in fines was a cost of doing business. The first-round draft pick, the 31st overall in 2008, was a genuine blow, a denial of a premium asset. But these were quantifiable losses. They could be absorbed. They could be rationalized as the price paid for the competitive advantages allegedly gained. Bill Belichick's statement was a masterpiece of non-apology. He said he had misinterpreted the rules. Not that he broke them. Not that he was sorry. That he misunderstood. This semantic dodge infuriated rivals and fans alike. It felt like arrogance codified into legal speak. It suggested that the crime was not in the act, but in getting caught. The punishment, therefore, did not feel like an atonement. It felt like a toll paid on the road to continued dominance. The team's response on the field amplified this perception. They did not shrivel under the weight of the scandal. They erupted. The 2007 season became a 16-0 march of vengeful precision, as if to prove they never needed the stolen signals in the first place. This defiant excellence, however, became a paradox. It was either proof of their innate greatness, or the furious performance of an addict denied their fix. The penalty did nothing to resolve this tension. It only heightened it. But the true fallout lived in the intangible realm. With the evidence destroyed by the league, a vacuum of fact was created. And into that vacuum rushed a torrent of myth and allegation. The most persistent and damaging rumor was that the Patriots had not only taped signals, but had filmed the St. Louis Rams' final walkthrough practice before Super Bowl 36. This was the atom bomb of accusations. Stealing in-game signals was one thing. Stealing an opponent's private, pre-game rehearsal was an entirely different order of violation. It suggested not just an edge, but a premeditated dismantling of the opponent's entire game plan. The league, having shredded the tapes, could never definitively disprove it. Former Rams players like Mike Martz and Marshall Faulk voiced their lasting belief that it had happened. Their sense of violation was palpable. Their championship loss forever tainted by a ghost they could not exorcise. This myth, born from the league's own destructive act, became the central pillar of the scandal's dark mythology. It was unprovable, but it was also irrefutable. It lived in the shadow world the NFL itself had curated. Other rumors swirled like smoke. That the spying had been ongoing for years, perhaps dating back to Belichick's first championship in 2001. That it extended beyond football to include the theft of medical information or private personal details about opponents. That the system was so sophisticated it involved multiple cameras and real-time relay to a booth where signals were decoded and sent to the sideline within seconds. Each rumor, regardless of its basis in fact, found fertile ground because of the league's opacity. The NFL's containment strategy had backfired spectacularly. By choosing to bury the evidence rather than expose it, they guaranteed that the public imagination would conjure a scandal far worse than the reality might have been. The specific crime of illegal signal taping was drowned out by the symphony of whispered conspiracies. The Patriots were no longer just cheaters. In the minds of many, they were supervillains. This is where the most profound and lasting damage was inflicted: the corrosion of legacy. For the players and coaches of the Patriots' early dynasty, their supreme achievement was now shadowed. The 3 Super Bowl trophies from 2001, 2003, and 2004 no longer gleamed with unambiguous glory. They were viewed by a significant portion of the football world through the lens of Spygate. Every clutch defensive stop, every perfectly timed defensive play, was now subject to a poisonous question. Did they know what was coming? The athletes who sacrificed their bodies, who executed under immense pressure, were robbed of the pure credit they deserved. Their legacy was bifurcated. To one group, they were the apex of football excellence. To another, they were beneficiaries of a rigged system. This doubt is the scandal's true inheritance. It is a stain that no amount of subsequent success, no fourth, fifth, or sixth championship, can completely erase. It is the asterisk that exists not in the record books, but in the collective consciousness of the sport. For the NFL as a whole, the fallout was a catastrophic loss of credibility. The league had positioned itself as the guardian of fair competition. Its handling of Spygate revealed that its primary interest was in the appearance of integrity, not its substance. The destruction of evidence was an act that any reasonable person would associate with guilt and cover-up. It taught fans that the league's version of events was malleable, designed to protect the business first and the truth second. The unanswered questions became a permanent fixture. How widespread was it? How many games were affected? What was really on those tapes? The league's refusal to provide answers was an answer in itself. It told us that some truths are too dangerous to be known, that the mythology of the sport is more valuable than its reality. The fallout, therefore, was not just a scandal about a team cheating. It was the moment a significant portion of the audience realized that the league itself could not be trusted to tell them the full story. The game on the field continued, but the covenant of belief between the league and its fans had been fractured, perhaps irrevocably. The most immediate and visible fallout from Spygate was not a change in won-loss records. It was a change in atmosphere, a shift in the very air that teams breathed. Before the scandal, the NFL operated with a certain baseline level of competitive paranoia, the natural tension between rivals. After the scandal, that paranoia was formalized, institutionalized, and weaponized. The revelation that a rival could be systematically, technologically, and illegally harvesting your strategic secrets did not just anger teams, terrified them, and terror is a powerful motivator. In the aftermath of 2007, the league did not just punish the Patriots. It entered a state of permanent, low-grade panic. The age of innocence was replaced by the age of the locked door, the encrypted channel, and the sidelong glance. Every opponent was now a potential spy. Every innovation was scrutinized for its potential for theft. The game's shadow war had been exposed, and the response was not to end the war, but to force every participant to dig deeper, more elaborate trenches. The most direct and practical change was the complete overhaul of in-game communication and signal systems. The old methods were now seen as hopelessly vulnerable. Teams that had relied for decades on a single coach sending in hand signals from the sideline were suddenly faced with the paralyzing thought that their entire lexicon was in an opponent's database. The response was a swift, league-wide arms race in obfuscation. Teams employed multiple signalers, using a dizzying array of coaches and players to send decoy calls. They used laminated sheets with hundreds of codes, cycling through them by quarter, by series, even by play. Some teams turned to wristbands with vast lists of plays, where the signal from the sideline was no longer a play call, but a 3-digit number corresponding to an entry on the quarterback's wristband. The physical choreography of the sideline became more complex, a frantic semaphore designed not for clarity, but for confusion. The goal was no longer just to communicate with your own players. It was to baffle the opposing staff staring back at you from across the field. The game within the game had become a frantic, exhausting contest of encryption. The NFL league office, stung by the criticism of its lax oversight, reacted with a flurry of new regulations and security theater. They dramatically expanded the list of prohibited items on the sideline and in the coaching booth. The presence of any personal electronic device, from a cell phone to a tablet not issued by the league, became a major violation. League security personnel were given greater authority to patrol sidelines and confiscate equipment. The specifications for the official coach-to-quarter headset system were tightened, with new protocols for encryption and frequency monitoring to prevent interception. The league even instituted a rule requiring all clubs to retain their own copies of practice and game footage for a set period, creating a paper trail meant to deter and expose illicit editing or destruction of film. These were reactive, defensive measures. They were not born of a proactive vision for integrity, but of a desperate need to be seen as doing something, anything, to restore a semblance of control. The message to the clubs was clear. The league would now be watching the watchers, adding another layer of surveillance to an environment already choked with distrust. This new culture of suspicion fundamentally altered relationships between coaches and staff across the league. The fraternal bonds of the coaching community, already strained by competition, were now laced with genuine mistrust. When a coach left one team for another, the hiring team would often perform a debriefing, a polite term for an interrogation about the former employer's tendencies and methods. But now, these conversations carried a darker subtext. Was there espionage? What should we look for? Former colleagues became potential intelligence assets or potential security risks. Assistant coaches applying for jobs found themselves fielding subtle questions about their ethical boundaries. The old boy network still functioned, but it now came with non-disclosure agreements and paranoid glances. The shared language of football was now punctuated by unspoken accusations and unasked questions. For players, this shift was both bewildering and burdensome. They were now tasked with learning and executing under these new Byzantine communication systems. A defensive play call was no longer just a play call. It was a sequence of gestures from two different coaches, cross-referenced with a wristband code, all while trying to read an offense lining up in front of them. The mental load increased exponentially. The margin for error, already razor-thin, became even finer. More importantly, the scandal planted a seed of doubt in their minds about the purity of their own workplace. Players began to wonder about the sources of their own coaching staff's brilliance. Were those brilliant halftime adjustments born of pure football intellect, or of some clandestine feed? And conversely, when they lost, the easiest, most corrosive explanation was now readily available. Maybe they didn't beat us. Maybe they stole from us. This mentality provided a ready-made excuse for failure, but it also robbed players of the simple, hard truth of a straight-up loss. It complicated the essential, binary nature of the competition. The irony of this new culture is that it likely did little to actually stop a truly determined espionage operation. It simply raised the cost and complexity. If the central lesson of Spygate, as interpreted by the league and its teams, was don't get caught, then the new policies just meant you had to be smarter. The focus on sideline electronics ignored other vectors. The interception of radio transmissions from the press box, the hacking of digital playbooks, the cultivation of sources within opposing buildings, the analysis of public broadcast footage with sophisticated software to lip-read calls or spot minute tendencies. The shadow war didn't end. It evolved. The culture of suspicion didn't create security. It created a more paranoid, more stressful, and ultimately less trustworthy environment for everyone involved. It made the process of playing and coaching football feel less like a sport and more like a grim, defensive bureaucracy. The league had tried to use rules to patch a hole in its culture, but the culture itself, the win-at-all-costs pressure, remained unchanged, festering beneath the new layers of security protocol. The game had learned to protect its signals, but it had forgotten how to trust. If Spygate was the fracture, then Deflategate was the painful, lingering ache that proved the bone had never truly healed. The two scandals, separated by 7 years and involving entirely different rules, are forever linked in the DNA of the modern NFL. They are not merely sequential events. They are cause and effect. The saga of underinflated footballs in the 2014 AFC Championship game cannot be understood outside the long, dark shadow cast by the destroyed tapes of 2007. Spygate had not been resolved. It had been buried. And when the earth trembled again in 2015, what erupted was not a new scandal, but the unresolved poison of the old one. Deflategate was, in essence, Spygate's second act. It was the moment the league's credibility debt came due, with catastrophic interest. The initial report about the Patriots footballs being under the league-mandated PSI threshold did not emerge into a neutral environment. It landed in a media and fan landscape already preconditioned by Spygate to believe the worst. The immediate public and pundit reaction was not skepticism or caution. It was a collective, almost weary nod. Of course. Of course it was the Patriots. Of course it was Belichick. The narrative template was already engraved. A brilliant but ethically flexible organization had once again pushed beyond the rules in pursuit of a marginal, technical advantage. Spygate had established a pattern of behavior in the public mind. Deflategate was merely the latest data point confirming that pattern. The presumption of guilt was instant and overwhelming, not because the science of deflation was clear, but because the psychology of suspicion had been cemented years earlier. The Patriots, and by extension their fans, were now living in a prison of their own past making. Every success was scrutinized. Every anomaly was viewed as a potential conspiracy. They had lost the benefit of the doubt, perhaps forever. This preconditioning critically shaped the league's own response. Commissioner Roger Goodell and the NFL headquarters were themselves haunted by the ghost of Spygate. The primary criticism of their 2007 investigation was that it had been too quick, too opaque, and too focused on containment. They had been accused of being weak, of letting a powerful franchise off too lightly, of failing to uncover the full truth. Facing a new controversy involving the same central figures, Goodell was determined not to repeat those perceived mistakes. This time, there would be no swift, contained resolution. This time, there would be a sprawling, forensic, and publicly documented investigation. He appointed a high-powered external lawyer, Ted Wells, and gave him a seemingly limitless mandate. The result was a 243-page report, a document of exhaustive detail and dramatic conclusions. This was the league's overcorrection. It was an attempt to exorcise the ghost of Spygate by performing a public autopsy on Deflategate. The goal was no longer just to adjudicate a rule violation. It was to stage a theatrical demonstration of the league's newfound rigor and moral authority. But this aggressive approach was fatally compromised by its own origins. The Wells investigation, for all its pages and footnotes, was built on a foundation of profound distrust. Every interaction with the Patriots was viewed through the lens of prior deceit. The organization's reluctance to fully cooperate was seen not as legal prudence, but as further evidence of guilt. Tom Brady's destruction of his cell phone, a moment that became the centerpiece of the league's case, was interpreted not as a celebrity's desire for privacy, but as the act of a man with something to hide, a direct echo of the league's own destruction of Spygate evidence. The league was applying a standard of scrutiny so intense, so presumptive of bad faith, that it could only ever find what it was already looking for: confirmation of a culture of cheating. The science of the deflation itself, the murky ideal gas law, the inconsistent gauge measurements, the lack of a definitive baseline became almost secondary. The real evidence in the court of NFL opinion was behavioral. It was the Patriots being the Patriots. Spygate had provided the motive, the character evidence, that made the technical case plausible. The league was not just investigating deflated footballs. It was prosecuting a reputation. The staggering, unprecedented punishment, a 4-game suspension for Tom Brady, a $1 million fine for the team, and the loss of first and fourth-round draft picks, was a direct product of this compounded suspicion. The severity was not proportional to the alleged act of tampering with equipment. It was proportional to the cumulative weight of Spygate and the perceived obstruction during the Wells investigation. Goodell was punishing the crime in front of him with the accumulated fury for the crime he felt he had mishandled years before. It was retroactive justice. The message was clear: we will not be accused of leniency this time. The credibility debt from 2007 was being collected from the franchise in 2015. For the Patriots and their fans, this felt like a profound double jeopardy. They had already been tried and punished for Spygate. Now, they were being punished again under a different statute, but with the sentence enhanced by their prior record. The fight over Deflategate became a fight over legacy, over narrative, over the soul of their achievements. Brady's defiant legal battle, which eventually reduced his suspension, was not just about 4 games. It was a refusal to let the league permanently brand him with the same scarlet letter that had been sewn onto his coach's hoodie. The conflict dragged on for over a year, a draining, ugly spectacle that consumed the sport. It was Spygate's final toxic bloom. The doubt that had been seeded in 2007 had grown into a vine so thick it now threatened to strangle the present. The past was not past. It was an active, malicious force, distorting facts, motivating overreach, and ensuring that no allegation against this team, no matter how scientifically shaky, would ever be simple again. The Shadow War had entered a new phase, not of stolen signals, but of contested reality itself. This software is a crown jewel of intellectual property. Corporate espionage is a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Why would professional sports be immune? The theft of a team's analytical engine would be like stealing the formula for a pharmaceutical drug. It would allow a rival to replicate years of research and development overnight. Furthermore, the data fed into these systems, detailed player tracking information, proprietary health metrics, psychological assessments, is itself a target. Knowledge of a star quarterback's hidden injury or a linebacker's personal issue could be leveraged in countless subtle ways, on and off the field. Communication systems, despite improved encryption, present another attack vector. The coach-to-quarterback radio system, while secure in theory, is a piece of technology operating in a hostile environment. While outright interception may be difficult, jamming or deliberate signal interference at a critical moment remains a threat. More vulnerable are the myriad of unofficial communications. Text messages between coaches and agents, emails about strategy or personnel, the use of popular encrypted apps like Signal or WhatsApp for informal football talk. These channels exist outside the league's controlled infrastructure. A determined adversary could exploit human error, a phishing scam, a misplaced phone, to gain access to a stream of candid, strategic conversations. The human element is always the weakest link in any security chain. The league's safeguards, while improved since the reactive measures post-Spygate, struggle to keep pace with the ingenuity of those seeking an edge. The NFL employs cybersecurity firms and has protocols for digital device management. But this is a constant arms race. For every firewall erected, there is a hacker looking for a new vulnerability. The 2019 incident involving a Patriots video crew filming the Cincinnati Bengals sideline from the press box. A bizarre echo of Spygate in a new context showed that old habits die hard, even as the world digitizes. More tellingly, it revealed a persistent mindset. The desire to capture information others cannot. If a team is willing to push boundaries with a camera in the digital age, what might they be willing to attempt in the unseen digital realm? The most frightening aspect of cyber espionage is its deniability and scale. A stolen physical tape can be confiscated. A hacked server leaves no calling card. A team could be pilfered for years without ever knowing. The doubt it sows is even more corrosive than that of Spygate. If a team goes on an inexplicable losing streak, could their systems have been compromised? If a player's performance mysteriously declines, could an opponent be using stolen medical or biomechanical data to target a weakness? This paranoia creates a universe of limitless suspicion, where failure can always be attributed to a ghost in the machine rather than to a flawed game plan or superior opponent. We stand at the precipice of this new battlefield. The tools have changed, but the fundamental conflict remains the same. The relentless hunger for any advantage in a universe of immense pressure and reward. The League, still scarred by the tangible, physical evidence of Spygate, now faces an enemy that is amorphous, borderless, and potentially far more destructive. The question is no longer just, what did they film? But what have they downloaded? The game's integrity is no longer threatened merely by a man with a camera on a sideline, but by invisible actors in server rooms halfway around the world. The Shadow War has gone dark in a new way. It has become silent, binary, and absolute. And the final whistle on this battle may never blow. The industrial shredder that consumed the Spygate tapes symbolized the end of an analog era of espionage. It was a ritual burning of the past. But in the ashes of those magnetic tapes, a new and more pervasive threat was already taking root. One that could not be so easily contained by destroying a physical object. The modern NFL runs on data. It is a league of ones and zeros of proprietary algorithms, digital playbooks, and encrypted communications. The sideline spy with a handheld camcorder has been joined, and perhaps surpassed, by a far more ominous figure, the ghost in the machine. The Shadow War has entered the digital frontier, a realm where theft can be executed from a continent away, where the scale of stolen information is limitless, and where the evidence can vanish with the click of a button. The game is no longer just about stealing a signal. It is about hacking the entire system. The vulnerabilities are everywhere, woven into the fabric of modern football operations. Start with the digital playbook. Gone are the thick physical binders. Today, plays, game plans, and tendencies are stored on tablets issued by the league. These devices are a treasure trove of strategic DNA. A sophisticated hacker, whether a rogue actor, a fanatical fan with advanced skills, or a state-sponsored entity with an interest in sports gambling, could potentially breach the league's network and access every team's digital library. Imagine the value of an entire season's worth of an opponent's game plans, downloaded silently months before a critical matchup. The theft would be invisible, leaving no broken locks or suspicious men in jackets. The competitive advantage would be so vast it would render the contest meaningless. Beyond the playbook lies the realm of advanced analytics. Teams invest millions in proprietary software that crunches data to find edges. Injury prediction models, opponent tendency analysis, play calling optimization algorithms. We speak of scandals in the macro sense, of franchises, legacies, and systemic failures. We assign blame and demand accountability from the distant, powerful figures whose names we know. But the machinery of espionage, like all machinery, is built and operated by human hands. For every famous coach or superstar player at the center of a storm, there are dozens of unseen individuals whose lives are irrevocably altered by their proximity to the secret. They are the foot soldiers of the Shadow War, the video assistants, the quality control coaches, the low-level football operations staff. They are not villains in any classic sense. They are ambitious young men and women, desperate to climb the ladder in an impossibly competitive industry, who find themselves handed an ethical grenade with the pin already pulled. Their stories are the human ledger where the true cost of the scandal is tallied, not in fines or draft picks, but in shattered careers, moral compromise, and lifelong regret. Consider the position of a video assistant in their mid-20s. They have spent years working for free as an intern, grinding in a dark film room, fueled by the dream of a full-time job in the NFL. They finally get their break. Their directive is simple: assist the coaching staff by providing any and all useful information. The culture is one of relentless pressure to find an edge. Then, one day, a senior staffer gives them a camera and a credential for an opposing team's sideline. The instruction is vague but clear. The line is never explicitly stated, but it is implicitly crossed. In that moment, they face a devastating choice. Do they refuse, likely ending their hard-won career before it even begins, branding themselves as someone who can't handle the pressure, or isn't a team player? Or do they rationalize it? Asterisk, everyone is looking for an edge. This is just part of the business. I'm just following orders. Asterisk, they take the camera. In that instant, they become complicit. They trade a piece of their integrity for a chance to stay in the game. The weight of that transaction never leaves them. For those who participate, the aftermath is a prison of silent guilt. They may never be named publicly. They may escape formal punishment. But they must live with the knowledge of their role. They must watch the games, see the victories their stolen intelligence may have enabled, and feel a hollow dissonance. They sit in staff meetings, listen to coaches praise the great preparation, and know a part of it was a fraud. They become strangers to themselves. The passion that drew them to football, the love of strategy, the purity of competition is poisoned. They are now keepers of a secret that isolates them. They cannot talk about it with colleagues, with friends, with family. They are alone with their complicity, marooned on an island of their own making. For some, the only escape is to leave the sport they loved entirely, carrying a resume they can never fully explain and a conscience they can never fully soothe. Then there are the whistleblowers, or those who quietly resist. Their cost is more direct, more professional, but no less severe. The young quality control coach who sees something irregular and reports it to a superior, only to be told to focus on his own job. The staffer who asks one too many questions about the origin of certain information and finds themselves suddenly marginalized. passed over for promotion, or dismissed in the next round of staff adjustments. The NFL is a small, incestuous world. Reputations are everything. To be labeled as not a culture fit, as difficult, or as someone who doesn't understand how things work is a career death sentence. The message is broadcast in 1,000 subtle ways. The ship is willing to sail into ethical gray areas. If you are not, you are welcome to swim back to shore. The pressure to conform, to be a good soldier, is overwhelming. Those who resist often do so at the cost of their professional dreams, sacrificing their future in football for a principle the institution itself seems to have abandoned. The senior coaches and coordinators who may have been aware, but not directly involved, occupy a special tier of anguish. They operate in the realm of plausible deniability. They ask for information, and it miraculously appears. They don't ask how. This willful ignorance is its own form of moral cowardice. After the scandal breaks, they must perform a public and private ballet of evasion. They must look their players, their families, and the media in the eye and dissemble. They must live with the knowledge that their professional achievements, the very pillars of their identity, may be partially built on sand. Their legacy is intertwined with the scandal, yet they can never fully claim or disavow it. They are forever suspended in the purgatory between perpetrator and victim, guilty of the sin of omission, of allowing the culture of whatever it takes to flourish under their watch. This human cost extends to the families of these individuals. The spouses who see the stress but are told they wouldn't understand. The children who sense their parents' distance and preoccupation. The personal relationships strained by a secret that cannot be shared. The scandal is not contained within the facility walls. It bleeds into homes, into quiet moments, into the fabric of a personal life now defined by a public lie. The job that was supposed to be a dream becomes a source of shame and anxiety. Ultimately, the human cost is the corruption of purpose. Football, for these individuals, began as a calling. It was about the beauty of the game, the pursuit of excellence, the camaraderie of a shared goal. Espionage reduces it to a cynical transaction. It replaces passion with paranoia, trust with tradecraft, and achievement with asterisks. From the outside, a loss is a simple line in a record book. A score, a statistic. But inside the locker room, inside the mind of a player or a coach, a loss is a living thing. It is a specific sequence of events, of decisions, of physical failures and mental errors. It has a cause and effect that can be analyzed, agonized over, and eventually, if painfully, accepted. Unless, that is, a seed of doubt is planted. The doubt that the contest was not pure, that the opponent was not just better on that day, but was operating with a map of your intentions. For the teams on the opposite sideline of a spying operation, their loss is transformed from a football result into a psychic injury. They are not just defeated, they are violated. And the most agonizing part is the impossibility of ever proving the extent of the theft, or of ever reclaiming what was taken from them. To understand this, you must listen to the voices from the other side. Listen to the members of the 2001 St. Louis Rams, a legendary offensive team dubbed the greatest show on turf, who were stunned by the underdog Patriots in Super Bowl 36. For years, their loss was considered a great upset. After Spygate, it became a potential crime scene. Former Rams coach Mike Martz has spoken of his enduring belief that his team's walkthrough was spied upon. He described the Patriots' defensive performance as having an almost supernatural level of anticipation. For players like Marshall Faulk or Kurt Warner, men whose legacies are defined by excellence and sportsmanship, the revelation introduced a poison into the memory of their finest hour. They are left not with a clean memory of a battle lost, but with the gnawing suspicion that they were not outplayed, but outfoxed in a way that had nothing to do with football. Their what if is not an idle fantasy. It is a haunting, unresolved question mark attached to a championship they believed was theirs. The psychological impact is a unique form of torment. Imagine preparing all week, crafting a game plan built on deception and surprise. You install new plays, new checks, new signals. You believe you have constructed a strategic puzzle the opponent cannot solve. Then, from the first series, you see a defense aligning perfectly to your new formations. You hear linebackers calling out your audibles. You see subtle adjustments that seem to anticipate your every move. The feeling is not just of being outmatched. It is of being seen, of being naked. Your strategic soul feels laid bare. Confidence curdles into paranoia. Trust in your own preparation evaporates. Players begin to second-guess the play calls, wondering if they are walking into a trap. Coaches on the headset descend into frantic, confused chatter. Asterisk, how do they know? Did we tip something? Asterisk, the foundation of competition that both sides start with a secret plan is shattered. You are not playing chess anymore. You are playing chess while your opponent reads your mind. This dynamic creates an impossible burden of proof for the victim. The evidence of spying is not a fumble or an interception. It is an absence. It is the lack of surprise. How do you prove that a linebacker jumped a route because he stole a signal, and not because he is a brilliant student of film who recognized a tendency? How do you prove a defensive call was the product of illicit intelligence, and not superior coaching intuition? You cannot. The crime, by its nature, mimics legitimate football genius. This is why the destroyed tapes were such a profound betrayal. They were the one piece of tangible evidence that could have converted suspicion into fact, or perhaps, absolved the accused. Without them, the victims are condemned to a purgatory of their own certainty. They know in their guts what happened, but they can never prove it. Their testimony is dismissed as sour grapes, the lament of losers looking for an excuse. They are robbed of their loss, and then robbed of the credibility to complain about the theft. The corrosion extends to the meaning of their own effort. The hours of film study, the physical punishment endured in practice, the emotional investment in the game plan, all of it is retroactively devalued. Was their sacrifice rendered meaningless by a guy with a camera in the stands? This question erodes the very reason athletes play the game. They play for the authenticity of the struggle, to discover in a fair fight who is better. When that fairness is compromised, their effort becomes a performance in a rigged carnival, not a test of will. For a professional athlete, whose identity is so deeply tied to their performance, this is an existential wound. It attacks the core of who they are and what their life's work has meant. For some, the only response is a burning public anger. For others, it is a quieter, more profound disillusionment. They may leave the game earlier, or view it with a cynical detachment forever after. The sport they loved has betrayed them not by being too hard, but by being dishonest. The bond of trust that must exist between competitors, the trust that you are both abiding by the same fundamental rules, has been broken. And once broken, it can never be fully repaired. You can move on, you can even face that opponent again, but you will always glance at their sideline with a different set of eyes. You are no longer just looking at a rival. You are looking at a potential thief. Ultimately, the victim's perspective is one of permanent disempowerment. They were acted upon. Their strategic home was burglarized. And the authorities, in the form of the league, after a brief flurry of activity, largely boarded up the house and told them to move on. They are left with a stolen legacy and a box full of what-ifs that can never be answered. Their chapter in NFL history is forever footnoted by a scandal they did not create but must eternally endure. Their chapter in NFL history is forever footnoted by a scandal they did not create but must eternally endure. They did not just lose a game. They lost the peace that should come with knowing you gave your all in a fair fight. They lost the simple, clean truth of their own story. And that is a loss for which there is no stat, no trophy, and no consolation. The story of a scandal is never just the story of the act itself. It is the story of how that act is discovered, framed, and sold to the public. In the modern sports landscape, the media is the essential intermediary in this process. It is the lens through which we see everything. And like any lens, it can clarify, distort, magnify, or obscure. The spy scandals presented the American sports media with its most complex and consequential narrative challenge in a generation. This was not a simple story of right and wrong. It was a murky tale of ethics, technology, and legacy. The media's journey through this story was not a straight line of pursuit and revelation. It was a messy, often contradictory cycle of neglect, frenzy, and ultimately tribal polarization. To understand how the scandals reshaped the NFL, we must also understand how they reshaped and were reshaped by the Fourth Estate. In the early years, the media's role was largely one of complicity through silence. The rumors of systematic spying by the Patriots dynasty were an open secret in league circles for years before Spygate broke. Beat reporters, columnists, and even national voices heard the whispers from defeated coaches and frustrated executives. But the story was largely ignored or downplayed. The reasons for this were a tangled web of professional incentives. First, there was the access economy. The Patriots under Belichick were a notoriously closed fortress. Aggressively pursuing a cheating scandal against the league's most successful and media-hostile team was a sure way to lose credentials, sources, and the ability to do one's job. Second, there was the high bar of proof. Accusing a team of cheating without ironclad evidence was a career-risking move. The rumors were just that, rumors. Third, and perhaps most subtly, there was the league's overarching narrative. The NFL was riding a wave of unprecedented popularity. The Patriots dynasty was a central, compelling plotline. To puncture that story with allegations of fraud was to attack the product itself. The media, dependent on the league for access and content, often unconsciously adopts its framework. So the whispers remained in the background, a buzzing nuisance drowned out by the roar of championship parades. The ignition of the Spygate story in 2007, forced by the Jets' actions, changed everything. The media, caught flat-footed, swung from neglect to hyper-aggressive saturation coverage. This was now a certified scandal with league action, and it was a ratings bonanza. For weeks, it dominated the airwaves and back pages. But the nature of this coverage was telling. It focused overwhelmingly on the punishment and the politics. The size of the fine, the lost draft pick, the Belichick-Mangini feud, the league's destruction of the tapes. The deeper, more difficult journalistic pursuit, the forensic investigation, was largely absent. How long had this been going on? Which specific games were affected? What competitive impact did it truly have? These questions required a level of investigative digging that the 24/7 news cycle does not incentivize. It was easier, and more immediately engaging, to focus on the drama of the moment. The defiant press conferences, the outraged rivals, the symbolic act of the shredder. The media amplified the scandal's noise but often failed to illuminate its substance. They reported on the explosion, but not on the architecture of the bomb. This dynamic reached its apex with Deflategate. Here, the media's prior failure became a catalyst for distortion. Haunted by the criticism that it had been too soft on Spygate, a segment of the media, particularly certain influential platforms and personalities, overcorrected with a prosecutorial zeal. The initial report about underinflated footballs was treated not as an allegation to be investigated, but as a confirmed act of treachery. The Wells report was consumed not as a legal document to be critically analyzed, but as a sacred text proving guilt. Nuance was buried under a mountain of hot takes. The complex science of the ideal gas law was reduced to a punchline or ignored altogether. The story became a morality play, a chance to finally hold the Patriots accountable for the sins of the past that had been inadequately punished. In this phase, the media didn't just report the story. It became an active participant in the polarization, crafting clear-cut narratives of heroes and villains for an audience already primed by the unresolved residue of Spygate. The league's influence on this media ecosystem was profound and often direct. The NFL is not a passive subject of journalism. It is a powerful entity that manages information with the sophistication of a government. Through selective leaks, carefully staged press conferences, and the powerful carrot and stick of access, the league can steer narratives. During Spygate, the league's message of swift punishment and closure was echoed by many commentators eager to move on to the season. During Deflategate, the league's relentless, detail-oriented public relations campaign, showcasing the Wells report, was designed to project an image of exhaustive diligence. Media outlets dependent on league-sanctioned access, broadcast partners in particular, often found themselves parroting the league's talking points, or at least softening their criticism. The league's control over credentialing, its ownership of NFL Network, and its multi-billion-dollar relationships with television networks created a powerful atmosphere of self-censorship. To challenge the league's version of events too aggressively was to risk being frozen out of the inner circle. The end result of this cycle is a fractured, tribalized media landscape that mirrors the fractured fanbase. Today, coverage of the Patriots' legacy and of the spy scandals themselves is often predetermined by the outlet's audience or the commentator's established brand. There are media camps. Those who view the Patriots as definitive cheaters whose titles are irredeemably tainted, and those who dismiss the scandals as overblown witch hunts fueled by jealousy. Objective, dispassionate analysis of what actually happened and what its true competitive impact was is now almost impossible to find. It has been replaced by commentary that reinforces existing beliefs. The media, which should have been the mechanism for uncovering the complete truth, became instead a megaphone for partial truths and a platform for entrenched positions. So, was the full story ever truly pursued or told? The uncomfortable answer is no. The initial silence left the roots of the scandal unexplored. The frenzied coverage of the crises focused on drama over detail. The league's media management successfully contained the scope of the inquiry, and the eventual polarization made a sober historical assessment impossible. The media's failure is not that it created the scandals, but that it failed to transcend them. It failed to serve as a consistent, independent check on power, whether that power was held by a team or by the league itself. We are left with a pile of fragments. Shocking headlines, defiant denials, scientific debates, and destroyed evidence. The media presented us with all the pieces of the puzzle, but it was never able, or perhaps never truly willing, to assemble them into a complete, undeniable picture. The story of the spy scandals, therefore, remains a story with a broken narrative, a mystery whose solution was lost not only in a shredder, but in the noise of the very machine meant to give it clarity. Fandom is not a rational enterprise. It is a covenant of faith. It is an investment of identity, of community, and of memory in the fortunes of a group of strangers wearing a chosen logo. The returns on that investment are paid in emotional currency. The thrill of victory, the pride of association, the shared narrative of a season, of an era. But what happens when the foundation of that narrative is cracked? When the achievements you celebrated, the moments that define your connection to a team and to fellow fans, are retrospectively shadowed by doubt. The spy scandals did not just challenge teams and a league. They forced every fan into a personal and collective reckoning. For those who loved the implicated dynasty, it was a crisis of faith. For those who hated them, it was a validation of suspicion. And for everyone, it was a disturbing lesson in the cost of victory and the fragility of the stories we tell ourselves. For the devoted fan of the New England Patriots, the years following Spygate and Deflategate were an exercise in relentless psychological defense. The cognitive dissonance was immense. On one hand, they had lived through the most thrilling period any fanbase could imagine. The Cinderella Super Bowl win in 2001, the establishment of a cold, brilliant dynasty, the weekly spectacle of near-flawless execution. These were real memories, powerful emotional landmarks. On the other hand, an ever-present chorus of rivals, media, and even neutral observers now labeled those memories as fraudulent. The fan was faced with an impossible choice: to doubt the authenticity of their own joy, or to defiantly reject the accusations as the bitter jealousy of losers. Most chose the latter, constructing a fortress of rationalization. Asterisk, everyone was doing it, they just got caught. The league was out to get them. It was a minor rules infraction blown out of proportion. The tapes were destroyed to protect the league, not to hide wrongdoing. Asterisk, these were not just arguments, they were psychological lifelines. To pull on the thread of the scandal was to risk unraveling the entire tapestry of their fandom. The alternative, accepting that the core of their team's identity was compromised, was too painful to contemplate. So they defended not just their team but their own past emotional investments. This defense mechanism often hardened into a fiercer, more tribal loyalty. The external criticism, perceived as a hysterical witch hunt, bonded the fanbase closer. Us against the world. The scandals became a badge of persecution, further evidence of their team's greatness being so threatening it had to be torn down. This is a common human response to cognitive dissonance. When faced with information that conflicts with a deeply held belief, the belief often becomes more entrenched, not less. The fan's identity, now under siege, calcified around the very thing being attacked. They celebrated victories with an added layer of defiance, a middle finger to the detractors. But beneath that bravado, for many, there had to be a quiet, unspoken chamber of doubt, a place they never visited but whose existence they could sense. It manifested in the overzealousness of their arguments, the quickness to anger at any mention of an asterisk. They were defending not just a football team, but the sanctity of their own memories. It was exhausting, and it permanently altered the character of their fandom from one of joyful celebration to one of perpetual, embattled justification. For the fan of every other team, particularly the Jets, the Colts, the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Rams, the scandals provided a radically different but equally powerful narrative. The narrative of righteous victimhood. Their suspicions, their gut feelings that something was off about those crushing defeats, were validated. The spy scandals gave form to their frustration. It was no longer that their team was simply outplayed. They were outcheated. This provided a powerful, if bitter, solace. It preserved the honor of their own players and coaches. It explained the inexplicable. The scandals became the ultimate trump card in any argument. A debate about Tom Brady's greatness could be ended with 2 words: he cheated. A discussion of Belichick's genius could be halted with a mention of a destroyed tape. For these fans, the Patriots' triumphs were not achievements to be respected, but crimes to be prosecuted. Their own team's failures were not failures at all, but the inevitable result of a rigged system. This perspective, however, also carried a poison. It allowed for a perpetual escape from accountability. Not every loss to the Patriots was due to espionage or deflated footballs. Sometimes they were just better. But the scandal provided a ready-made excuse, a way to bypass the painful but necessary process of analyzing real football failures. It fostered a culture of grievance that could be more satisfying than the hard work of objective analysis. Furthermore, it reduced the rich, complex history of 2 decades of NFL football to a single, monotonous story of good versus evil, of purity versus corruption. It simplified the past in a way that felt good but obscured truth. The rival fans' anger was real and often justified, but it also risked trapping them in a cycle of resentment, making it impossible to appreciate or even accurately assess the football history they had actually witnessed. Beyond these 2 warring tribes, the scandals forced the neutral fan, the pure lover of the sport, into an uncomfortable position. They were asked to watch the games, to marvel at the excellence, while knowing the backdrop of accusation and institutional failure. It created a layer of cynicism that contaminated the viewing experience. A brilliant defensive adjustment prompted a whisper. Did they know? A perfectly timed defensive play sparked a thought. How? The scandals inserted a question mark into the grammar of the game. The fundamental contract between the sport and its audience, that what they are watching is a fair contest, had been breached. For these fans, the dilemma was about continued engagement. Could they still invest emotionally in a product whose integrity was so publicly and repeatedly questioned? Many could, by compartmentalizing, by focusing on the athleticism and the drama and trying to ignore the shadow. But for others, the magic was permanently diminished. The NFL became just another form of entertainment, a scripted reality show where the outcomes felt suspect, rather than a genuine athletic contest. They became spectators, not believers. Ultimately, the fans' dilemma boils down to a profound question about what we, as consumers of this colossal entertainment product, are willing to accept in pursuit of the feelings victory provides. What is the ethical line we draw for our heroes? Is any method justified if it delivers a championship? The spy scandals revealed that for a significant portion of the audience, the answer is a complicated, often contradictory yes. We claim to want integrity, but we reward winning above all else. We condemn cheating in the abstract, but we find ways to explain it away when it benefits our tribe. The leagues and teams are not operating in a vacuum. They are responding to the market we create. Our thirst for victory, for dynasties, for legends, creates the pressure cooker that makes espionage seem like a viable, even necessary option. We are complicit in the culture that breeds the scandal. The fan's dilemma, therefore, is not just how to feel about the past. It is a mirror held up to our own priorities. It asks us what we truly value in the games we love, and what we are willing to sacrifice or forgive to feel the euphoria of a confetti storm. The answer, as the fractured, angry, and defensive state of the modern NFL conversation proves, is anything but simple. We are all, in some way, wrestling with tainted glory, trying to reconcile what we want to believe with what we fear might be true. To watch a game is to witness a complex agreement. We agree, as spectators and participants, to a set of artificial constraints. The field has boundaries. The clock has limits. The rules are arbitrary inventions designed not for the efficient completion of a task, but to create a specific, challenging, and beautiful form of conflict. Within those constraints, we celebrate creativity, force, and cunning. But this celebration immediately raises the oldest and most vexing question in all of sport. What is the difference between cleverness and corruption? Between exploiting a loophole and tearing down the wall? The spy scandals did not create this question, but they forced it into the starkest possible light, dragging it from the theoretical realm of barstool debates into the cold, factual arena of federal lawsuits and destroyed evidence. They present us with a philosophical abyss, a chasm where the very concept of fair play is tested against the primal, uncompromising will to win. We must start by acknowledging that the history of sports is a history of rule-breaking that later becomes innovation, and of innovation that later becomes cheating. The spitball was once legal, then illegal, now a relic. The forward pass was once a radical, barely legal trick. The hidden ball trick in baseball is celebrated as clever, not criminal. The line shifts. It is drawn and redrawn by generations of competitors pushing against the limits of the possible. For decades in football, stealing signals with your eyes and a notepad was considered the highest form of gamesmanship, a test of football IQ. It was part of the intellectual fabric of the contest. So, when does the act of gathering intelligence cross from being a laudable display of dedication into being a condemnable act of theft? The difference, historically, has often been one of technology and scale. Using your mind is noble. Using a prohibited tool is base. But this is a fragile distinction. Is a coach who uses an eidetic memory to recall every signal an opponent used 3 seasons ago fundamentally different from one who uses a database compiled from illicit video? Both are using an external advantage. One is biological, the other technological. Do we legislate the means or the ends? The NFL's own rulebook is a sprawling, living document, a testament to the endless game of cat and mouse between lawmakers and lawbreakers. Every rule exists because someone at some point tried something. The prohibition on stick-'em came after receivers used it to make gloves obsolete. Regulations on equipment thickness and hardness emerged after innovations in padding and helmets turned players into weapons. The rules against electronic espionage were written because the technology made it possible. The law follows the crime. This creates a dangerous ethical landscape for the ultra-competitive. In an environment where every detail matters, the very existence of a rule can be seen as a marker of a potential advantage. If the league felt the need to outlaw something, then that something must provide a tangible benefit. To the mind obsessed with marginal gains, a rule is not a barrier. It is a signpost pointing toward a forbidden fruit. The philosophical question becomes, is it more ethical to scrupulously follow every dot and comma of a constantly evolving rulebook, or to pursue victory by any means not explicitly forbidden until you are caught and a new rule is written to stop you? The former is the path of the sportsman. The latter is the path of the pioneer or the cheat, depending entirely on your perspective. The spy scandals force us to confront the uncomfortable relationship between process and outcome. We claim to value the how as much as the who. But do we? Our culture venerates winners. We name stadiums after them, build statues in their honor, and tell their stories for generations. The how often becomes a footnote, a colorful anecdote in the larger legend of triumph. If a team wins a championship using illicit methods that are never discovered, does their victory lose its value? In a purely practical sense, no. The trophy is still shiny. The parade still happens. The rings are still fitted. The fraud, if successful, becomes history. It is only when the fraud is exposed that we are forced to perform the painful calculus of legacy. This reveals a terrible truth. Our morality in sports is often retrospective, not inherent. We are outraged by the cheat we catch, not by the act of cheating itself. We punish the exposed, not the action. This creates a perverse incentive where the greatest sin is not breaking the rules, but being incompetent enough to get caught. This brings us to the core of the abyss, the nature of consent and the social contract of competition. When two teams take the field, they enter into a shared, unspoken agreement. They agree to the rules as a framework for a fair test. Espionage of the scale alleged in Spygate violates that contract at a fundamental level. It is not a violation of a technicality. It is a betrayal of the premise of the contest. It is akin to a poker player seeing his opponent's cards. The game is no longer poker. It is a different activity altogether, one where only one party knows the true nature of the engagement. This is why the everyone does it defense rings so hollow, even if it were true. The wrong is not mitigated by common practice. The wrong is in poisoning the well of the contest itself. It transforms a shared struggle into a unilateral deception. The victim is not just the opposing team, but the very idea of the game. Finally, we must grapple with the context of the modern NFL, a multi-billion-dollar entertainment cartel where coaches and executives are paid millions to produce results within an impossibly short timeline. The pressure is thermodynamic. It seeks release through any available vent. When you combine this pressure with the ambiguous, shifting line between gamesmanship and cheating, you create a perfect storm for ethical catastrophe. The philosopher's question becomes an employee's dilemma. Is your primary duty to the abstract principle of fair play, or to the concrete demands of your employer, your players, and your own career to win? When the difference between genius and failure is one win, and the difference between allowed and disallowed is the placement of a camera by 10 yards, the moral calculus can become horribly blurred. The spy scandals show us what happens when that calculus tips decisively toward victory at all costs. They are not an anomaly. They are a case study, a laboratory result demonstrating what occurs when a hyper-competitive culture is armed with technology and driven by pressure, then left to navigate a gray area with only a rulebook as its conscience. The abyss is not out there. It is woven into the fabric of the game we watch every Sunday. And we are all, willingly or not, peering over its edge. We arrive now at the final, most uncomfortable question. A question that all our investigation, all our dissection of history and human nature has been circling. Have the spy scandals, with their punishments and proclamations, their new rules and security protocols, actually changed anything? Or have they merely served as a temporary disruption, a brief period of heightened alert in a war that never ends? To believe the league's public stance, the scandals were painful but necessary surgeries. The tumors were cut out. The procedures were refined. The patient is now healthier, more secure, and protected against relapse. But this is a comforting fiction. The evidence, both historical and logical, points to a far more disquieting reality. The Shadow War was not concluded. It was merely driven deeper underground, made more sophisticated, and rendered more deniable. The demand for total informational dominance is a permanent, structural feature of the modern NFL. And wherever that demand exists, the supply of clandestine methods will inevitably emerge to meet it. Let us examine the league's countermeasures with clear eyes. The bans on sideline video, the secure radios, the electronic device policies, these are all defenses against the espionage of yesterday. They are Maginot Lines, impressive fortifications designed to stop the last war. They address the specific analog method of the 2007 Spygate operation. But as we have seen, the frontier of espionage is digital. It exists in cyberspace, in data packets, in social engineering, and in the vast gray market of information that flows between teams, agents, trainers, and sports science firms. Can the league encrypt a coach-to-quarterback radio? Certainly. Can it prevent a staffer from being befriended online by a disguised operative and casually probed for harmless-sounding information about team schedule or morale? Can it stop a sophisticated entity from hacking a scouting services database that multiple teams use? Can it stop a sophisticated entity from hacking a scouting services database that multiple teams use? The attack surface has expanded exponentially, while the league's defenses remain focused on the sideline. The incentives have not changed. They have intensified. The financial stakes are higher than ever. Coaching tenures are, if anything, shorter and more brutal. The analytical revolution has created a religion of marginal gains, where a 1% advantage is worth millions of dollars and countless hours of pursuit. In this environment, the moral hazard is overwhelming. The potential reward for successful, undetected espionage, a championship, career preservation, legacy, is astronomical. The penalty for getting caught, as history shows, is a finite cost. A draft pick, a fine, a temporary suspension. It is a cost-benefit analysis that, for the morally flexible or the desperately ambitious, can very clearly tilt in favor of taking the risk. The league's punitive measures are a cost of doing business, not a deterrent to the business itself. Consider the persistence of incidents even after the supposed cleansing. The 2019 case of a Patriots video crew filming the Bengals sideline from the press box was a haunting echo. The team claimed it was an innocent documentary crew making an error. The league, wary of another explosive scandal, issued a mild rebuke and moved on. But the symbolism was undeniable. The instinct to point a camera where it does not belong, to capture the forbidden sightline, remained alive. If this is what happens in the open with a credential around the neck, what occurs in the shadows? Former players and coaches, when speaking off the record, will often shrug and say a version of the same thing. You'd be naive to think it stopped. It just got smarter. They speak of signals being stolen not from the sideline, but from the high-definition broadcast feed, using AI-assisted pattern recognition. They whisper about the interception of non-secure communications between the press box and the sideline. They wonder about the integrity of their own internal networks. The most compelling argument for the inevitability of the shadow war is psychological. Spygate and Deflategate did not create a culture of purity. They created a culture of deeper suspicion. Every team now looks at its opponent and thinks, they are probably looking for an edge we haven't even considered. This paranoia is itself a catalyst for escalation. If you believe your rival is engaged in undetectable next-generation espionage, you face a terrible choice. Do you remain passive, trusting the league's security to protect you, and potentially compete at a permanent disadvantage? Or do you launch your own counterintelligence operations, if not to cheat, then to monitor and deter cheating by others? This is the security dilemma familiar to international relations. One state's defensive measures are seen by its rival as offensive preparations, leading to an arms race. The NFL has created this exact dynamic. The quest for defensive security morphs seamlessly into the development of offensive capabilities. The line between protecting yourself and penetrating your opponent blurs until it vanishes. Therefore, we are forced to confront the grim possibility. Espionage is not a correctable flaw in professional football. It is a feature of its final, fully realized form. The game has evolved from a physical contest to a strategic contest to an informational contest. The battlefield is no longer just the gridiron between the lines. It is the electromagnetic spectrum, the digital cloud, the psychology of the opponent, and the dark spaces in the rulebook. In a universe defined by extreme pressure, finite resources, and infinite scrutiny, the temptation to know the unknowable will forever beckon. The league can issue memos, conduct spot checks, and levy fines, but it cannot legislate away human nature, ambition, or the relentless logic of competitive advantage. The shadow war continues. Its soldiers are better trained, its weapons are more advanced, and its battles are entirely invisible. We, the audience, are left watching the spectacle on the field, a brilliantly lit stage, while beneath our feet, in the silent darkness, the true war for victory is fought and won. The cycle is not broken. It is simply turning on an axis we can no longer see. The silence after the crowd leaves is different now. It is no longer just the absence of sound. It is the presence of an echo. The echo of a whistle that was not just a signal to play, but a signal to begin a deception. The echo of a shredder grinding tapes into oblivion. The echo of a question that was asked but never answered. We began this journey in that quiet, with the simple, chilling image of something being destroyed to protect a story. We end it not with a verdict, for there can be none, but with a revelation. The spy scandals were not an interruption of the NFL's narrative. They were its logical conclusion. They exposed the fundamental, irreconcilable truth at the heart of modern professional football, that the league's obsessive pursuit of absolute competitive control, of a perfectly managed product, inevitably contains the seeds of its own corruption. The quest to eliminate chance, to master every variable, leads not to purity, but to a paradox. The only way to guarantee victory is to corrupt the conditions that make victory meaningful. We traced this corrosion from its genesis. We saw how the innocent, even admired craft of signal stealing, the intellectual chess match between rival coaches, morphed under the pressure of money, technology, and legacy into a systemic industrial espionage operation. We walked the corridors of the machine, understanding how a culture that worshipped the marginal edge could sanctify the unethical method. We witnessed the mechanics of the theft, the cold conversion of a coach's gestures into a decipherable code, a stolen language used to script victories that felt like predestination. We felt the human cost, the shattered careers and quiet guilt of the foot soldiers, and the profound violation of the victims, whose legacies were stolen not by a better team, but by a hidden advantage. We watched the league, our supposed referee, choose containment over transparency, narrative over truth, burning the evidence to save the facade. We followed the poison as it seeped through time, from Spygate to Deflategate, where the debt of distrust came due with staggering interest. We entered the digital frontier, where the shadow war evolved from camcorders to code, becoming invisible and potentially limitless. We analyzed the media's failure, its swing from complicit silence to polarized frenzy, and how it amplified the noise but failed to illuminate the truth. We sat with the fans in their dilemma, understanding how their tribal joy and righteous anger were both valid and both trapped in a prison of doubt. And finally, we stared into the philosophical abyss, confronting the terrifying blur between gamesmanship and fraud, and recognizing that in a world of infinite pressure and finite rules, the abyss stares back. The enduring damage is not to a single team's reputation, though that damage is profound. The damage is to the historical record itself. The NFL is a league that mythologizes its past. It sells nostalgia, legacy, and the immutable truth of its record books. The spy scandals injected a permanent solvent into that history. They made the past conditional. They attached a silent, pervasive maybe to the most celebrated achievements of an era. For every breathtaking play, there is now a whispered counter-narrative. Did they know? This doubt is the scandal's most insidious and successful creation. Cannot be erased by future championships, statistical dominance, or the passage of time. It has become a part of the story, a shadow in the film reel. The league, in its desperate attempt to protect its history by destroying the evidence, only succeeded in making its history unknowable. The cost of winning, when the rules become just another opponent to defeat, is the soul of the contest itself. Football is a beautiful lie we all agree to believe. We agree that this patch of grass is a battlefield, that this pigskin is a prize, that these arbitrary constraints create a meaningful test. The entire spectacle is a shared act of imagination. Espionage, at the scale we have examined, is a betrayal of that shared dream. It is one party waking up and deciding to change the rules of the dream without telling the other. It replaces shared struggle with unilateral deception. It transforms the athlete from a gladiator in an arena of fate into an actor in a script someone else has written. When winning is the only god, the temple of fair competition is the first thing sacrificed on its altar. So what are we left with? A sport that is still spectacular, still capable of breathtaking athleticism and strategic genius. But it is a sport viewed through a pane of glass that can never be perfectly cleaned. We see the brilliance, but we also see the faint, greasy smear of suspicion. We hear the roar of the crowd, but underneath it, if we listen closely, we can still hear the grinding whir of that shredder. The NFL, that brilliant, amoral machine, continues to produce its product. It has weathered the storm. It has incorporated the lessons, fortified its defenses, and tightened its narratives. But it has not, and perhaps cannot, address the core malignancy. The incentivized hunger for an edge that justifies any means. The game endures. The players play. The fans cheer. The legacy of the spy scandals is not the end of football. It is the end of football's innocence. It is the confirmation that in the cathedral of modern sport, where the lights are brightest and the stakes are highest, there are always shadows moving in the rafters. The pursuit of glory, when it becomes an absolute, does not elevate the game. It undermines the very foundation upon which glory must be built. We are left with a simple, unsettling truth. We love a game that, in its darkest corners, is willing to conspire against its own soul to give us what we demand. A winner at any cost. And in that truth, we must now decide what it is we are truly cheering for.